Hello everybody, I'm the introverted astrologer and today I'm bringing you my take on Prince William and Princess Catherine's composite chart. This is especially for my royal family enthusiasts. And I must admit this is the first time I've actually looked at the chart in detail and I was very surprised. I'd expected something as intense as the composite between Harry and Meghan, and yet the emphasis is very different in this composite. And this couple have to manage a lot of stress. And so if we go to the computer now, I'll show you what I mean. Now this composite chart is based on the midpoint method, and it is telling us about the life and dynamic of this relationship as though it was an entity in its own right. And I was initially surprised. I had thought there would be something more joyful and passionate. I was thinking of fifth house and Venus on an angle, etc. But once I began to delineate this, I began to better understand what this couple faces. And so we'll break this chart down a little bit. I'm going to consistently interpret using the Placidus house system, but the whole sign version is on your right if that's what you're more comfortable with. Now on first glance, we can see that some of the more fated points of connection are prominent. So for example, the vertex is hovering on the descendant of the chart. This vertex is said to be the doorway through which new and fated encounters with other people can enter into our life. And we can also see Pluto quite tightly on the ascendant with his connection to fate, to karma. The part of fortune isn't on an angle exactly, but it is very closely square to the ascendant-descendant axis. And these are all the kind of contacts that we would expect between us and a person who was going to be a major player. We can sometimes find the node in an angular position too, although here it isn't. We can also see that there's a good deal of cardinality in this chart. The cardinal signs are Aries, Libra, Cancer, Capricorn, and both William and Kate each have a good deal of cardinality in their own charts. The princess, for example, has a Cancer moon and a Capricorn sun, and William has a few things in Cancer too, and so the cardinality is reappearing. They are both strong people who are leaders in their own right. And there are a few things in each of their natal charts which will give us clues as to how the energy in this composite chart will play out. Pluto, perched on this ascendant, is quite forcefully telling us something about this relationship. It's going to be profoundly intense. The energy and dynamic of it will be life-changing, and both the parties involved will find that their lives and energy are quite overwhelmed by the force of this relationship. It isn't telling us whether this will work for better or worse. It's simply describing to us that the overhaul of these people's lives as a result of entering into this relationship is going to be heavy and transformative. And so these two people may initially experience a huge fascination with each other and find that their lives are set on a totally new path as a result of their union. Pluto is all or nothing, and it speaks of power, of death, of regeneration, and there is also a negative side to Pluto which can be extremely difficult. There can be power struggles, and one person may fall entirely under the spell of the other person. And something else we can note is that if a relationship with this kind of Pluto dominance breaks down, it can be very hard for the two people to heal afterwards. And this is because of the intense destructive emotions of bitterness, revengefulness, and negativity. They can be overwhelming long after the relationship has bit the dust. Part of what surprised me had been such a heavy sixth house emphasis. And so if we move to the sun now, it's conjunct with that Mercury and Venus. And the sixth house can be a very difficult house for relationships. And this is because it is the house of service. It can be our service to others or the service of others to us, but it isn't a house of equality, and it's not the easiest of relationship houses to find the composite sun. Now, giving to others is a form of service because we're giving without expectation of a reward in return. In a composite chart, this might sometimes mean that one person is giving more than the other, and that one is taking more than the other, and so we can have a resentment build up because of that unequal dynamic. But we also need to bear in mind that the 6th house of service could mean that a couple make it their common goal that they work together in the service of others, and that their only reward is to experience joint service, working in unity together towards the common aim of service to others. And in that way, the inherent inequality of the 6th house can be expressed in a more constructive way. This involvement with Venus and Mercury is assuring us of a relationship which involves deep love, ongoing communication. This chart has a Libra ascendant. Venus is the ruler of this chart, and so her aspects are very important. This trine to Uranus is assuring us that the relationship will have an unusual degree of personal freedom in it for the couple. However, Uranus is unusual, unorthodox, eccentric, and so William and Kate may feel impatient with following the traditional prescribed ways of being a royal couple. They could well tweak the model so that they can design a royal marriage that works for them. Now, all relationships have some tension. Some have more than others. We must remember that tension helps create liveliness, interest. It can keep relationships invigorated. Will this couple manage to balance the tension that we are being shown in this chart with the moon and the Mars? The square between the sun and the moon can certainly indicate mutual fascination. We can view the sun and the moon as being complementary principles representing archetypal energies. When we have a square between the sun and the moon, we are being shown that these principles are in tension, and that tension does create a mutual fascination, but it can also say that these two people are not wholly complementary to each other. It may stop them from feeling totally at ease in the relationship, but nonetheless there will be that strong pull. Because there are some fundamental differences between them, there may sometimes be problems. Differences of opinion, of outlook on life might build up. And then along comes Mars. What more could you need to keep releasing the tension that would build up between some of these points? We can quite safely bank on a lot of energy being applied within this relationship. The sun is showing us the will of the relationship, but Mars is telling us something about the ego drives of both people involved. It's the planet which represents the relationship's vital energies, how it asserts its individuality, how anger and tension are dealt with. There are going to be conflicts here. A need to keep managing very different energy levels and feelings of competition. If both William and Catherine are comfortable in their own skin, then this tension can be alleviated somewhat, because there may be some self-awareness regarding the human ego. And whilst there still may be competition and conflicts, it can help the people to compete with each other in a more healthy way, which keeps driving them on to achieve ever greater things. That underlying competition and drive will still be there to some extent, but will be more easily managed with maturity and self-awareness. Of course, Mars is also pulling in Mercury and Venus, so we can be assured that affection is going to be readily expressed within this union. This couple might also share some joint appreciation of Mercury-Venus type themes. For example, home decor, objects of beauty, what each perceives as beautiful. Nonetheless, there will still be differences of opinion and disagreements over certain matters. And one of the key learning curves that is emerging about this relationship is going to be how this couple manage to handle and channel their disagreements. There'll be that need to count from 1 to 10 to learn how not to fly off the handle. There is no question that Mars is going to rear its head. If we also consider its 12th house position, we can appreciate that if this couple is not able to deal with ongoing disagreement and dissent, then this Mars could even be the undoing of the relationship, because the 12th house can be what happens behind closed doors, but it can also be unconscious drives. I do suspect that the pressure that is put on this couple by having a public life with that strong 6th house emphasis on service is going to produce a lot of pressure on their emotions, on their family time together, on their joint enjoyment of family life. And this is going to be a source of tension and potentially arguments because of the intense demands that are placed on them as a couple. I did look for other signs in this chart to see if I could pick up great instability, potential infidelity, and I don't really see those signs. I think there's an active desire by these two to be of service, and I expect that us, the public, will never truly understand how hard it could be to sacrifice so much privacy and personal freedom in the course of public service. Venus-Mars is a little wide, but it does confirm substantial attraction between these two people. There will be that sexual magnetism, and a physical life is going to be important. Because it's the 6th, 12th house dynamic again, care would have to be taken that one party was not more selfish or insistent than the other at having sexual expression on their terms and at all costs. Because if it became too much of one giving and one taking, then again there would be this conflict emerging. Mars in the 12th could easily stew with resentment and suppressed anger. There are also a couple of wider aspects to the moon, including a square to Saturn and a trine to Jupiter. And so this square between Moon and Saturn is getting a little wide, but it is speaking of occasional loneliness and emotional alienation, and perhaps sometimes a conflict shown in other parts of the chart gets quite overwhelming and leaves the couple wondering whether they can cope with some of the difficulties they face. But there is simultaneously hope and optimism, feeling happy when they are together, for enjoying each other's company quite genuinely, and for exploring the world together in that spirit of optimism and faith that Jupiter brings. There is also a square between Venus and Neptune, which is suggesting that there is some over-idealisation going on. Perhaps at times this couple don't see each other for who they really are. Neptune makes us idealise things, and so each of them could sometimes be relating more to an ideal of how they think a relationship should unfold, rather than relating to the genuine physical person standing in front of them. Neptune confuses, it clouds and deceives, and we can over-idealise things and wear rose-coloured glasses. At times it may be that this relationship needs concrete assessment and evaluation. Those occasional reality checks are coming down to earth about exactly where the relationship is at. And so we've discussed a lot of conflict and tension, but we have to remember that tension, dissent, the thrashing out of different opinions can give a relationship an ongoing dynamism, because these challenges will keep presenting the need for the couple to reach creative solutions. And so it will certainly be a very alive relationship. because do separately have their own Moon-Mars aspects in their natal chart, so vigorous emotional expression and a lot of passion is going to be part of their separate constitutions. And they both have strong Cancer in their chart, with that emotional emphasis, with that love of family and the urge to nurture. The node and the moon in this composite are conjunct, and so family matters are a pivotal part of this relationship. And it isn't necessarily just the raising of their own nuclear family. Wider family ties, larger family concerns might also be a prominent part of this couple's life together. A couple of things that we will look at closer in my next video on this couple will include the synastry between them, and they do indeed have one of those inter-aspects between them that many Western astrologers would consider a death sentence, and indeed it can be very difficult, there's no denying. And this is that William's Pluto actually squares the moon in Princess Catherine's natal chart. I was very interested to see how that would appear in their composite. And as you can see, there is no strong aspect between Moon and Pluto here. And so that Moon-Pluto dynamic does not need to be a death sentence for this pair. Another thing that astrologers will often look for is the asteroid Juno. Juno is thought to be goddess of marriage. In my experience, Juno plays out rather differently than that, and that too is something we'll look at in my next video, because Juno inter-aspects can be very important. I thought I'd finish off by showing you a couple of the other royals' composite charts. I think we'll all come to see that these couples have each had their own separate problems, and that no relationships are perfect or free from tension. We can see here Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip. They had a 12th house Mars too. And I think there may well have been a lot of creative conflict going on behind closed doors. And this too likely tracks back to those duties and obligations on the relationship promised by Saturn in the 6th house of service. There may well have been over-idealisation and possibly some power plays or manipulative tendencies that these two would have had to contend with. But this first house sun is showing that this couple were stronger together than they were as individuals. This is one of the easier house positions for a composite sun. And again, we can see those harbingers of a fated relationship by noting that the vertex, the entry point for our fated connections with people, is on the descendant of this chart. Juno isn't on an angle as such, but she is very closely square to the ascendant-descendant axis. Neptune is tricky in relationship charts. There may well be an idealisation about family, roots, home life, and this is something that is repeated in the chart of King Charles and Queen Camilla. The King and Camilla have the asteroid Juno, purportedly the asteroid of marriage, on the descendant angle, and the part of fortune is close to the IC. This composite actually has a very big emphasis on communication, and I think the older we get, the more we come to understand the importance of communication in relationships. There are a few signs that this relationship would never be boring, and that it may well have more than its fair share of difficulties to negotiate. With that Saturn on Venus, the relationship could go one of two ways, and I think actually this union has encompassed both possible interpretations over time anyway. The first interpretation is that no matter how much affection the couple have for each other, it is never the time or the place. Saturn is bringing in that structural constraint to prevent the relationship becoming whole. And this could well be because one of the couple are having a relationship with somebody else. The second common manifestation is that there is a genuine and steady feeling for each other, but it is never expressed spontaneously. It will maintain that cool steadiness and have longevity to it. And I think this probably characterises the flavour of these two coming together later in life. Harry and Meghan have a different dynamic. We can see that the composite sun is in the 5th house, house of creativity, of self-expression and love affairs. Mars and Venus conjoin each other, testimony to the fusing of passion and the male-female archetypal energies. And just like William and Kate, there is that Cancer moon. In fact, it's a very prominent moon and shows that need for family ties. Indeed, their union has brought about some pressure on extended family ties, and we can certainly see some difficulties in this relationship too. And the last chart is between King Charles and the late Princess Diana. I would personally interpret this sun as being in the 6th house because it is so very close to the cusp. This relationship isn't without its strengths and indeed some very favourable aspects, but we can pick up a lot of conflict, discouragement, some very unrealistic energy because of the 12th house moon, Mars conjoining with Neptune and square to that Uranus. This moon, Pluto, Neptune dynamic going on within very close orb is definitely suggesting hidden and undermining emotional forces within this union. Some of the Mars-Neptune aspects, including the conjunction, can be very difficult in composite charts, as can that 12th house. This combination can show a relationship within which each party undermines, demoralises, demotivates the other. Both people are likely to feel somewhat discouraged and inferior to each other. We're all relieved that the Prince's very difficult year, with his wife's chemotherapy trials, is now drawing to a close. I will be bringing you a second relationship video on this royal couple, and in this video we'll look very closely at the interaspects, their synastry, what their individual planets are doing to each other, and we'll bring in some Magi Astrology techniques which will fill in quite a few of the gaps for us. We'll also be having a look at Juno, the asteroid that is meant to symbolise marriage. We'll look at Juno between these two charts in this next video. Just before that, however, I will probably be releasing a video on the outcome of the American elections. And until then, wherever you are in the world, take good care and God bless you and your families.